Hong Kong health authorities have activated their most serious response level after an outbreak of a new type of viral pneumonia in China.
A man has died from a new pneumonia virus in the central Chinese city of Wuhan.
There is now a report from the Center for Disease Control that they have the first U.S. case of that coronavirus.
New York now confirming its first case.
New York is one of a handful of states that's now declared a state of emergency due to the coronavirus.
The United States continues to see increasing cases in so many areas of the country.
New York State now has more coronavirus cases than any other country outside the U.S., according to the latest figures.
Cuomo is ordering residents to wear face coverings in public where social distancing is not possible.
The death toll in the U.S. tops 200,000, the highest in the world.
Worldwide coronavirus deaths have passed the 1 million mark, with 20% of those in the United States.
We know you know all about COVID-19. This has been a shared experience. I would venture to bet there's not a single person listening to this broadcast whose life was not profoundly impacted by the devastating virus that entered all of our lives a little over a year ago. Whether you lost a loved one, whether you lost a job or suffered a pay cut, whether you grew tired of being forced into an antisocial way of life, or whether you, like us, work in an essential field and had to carry on as if nothing had changed, with people depending on the uninterrupted continuation of the service you provide. Whatever your experience was during this ordeal, we've all got stories to tell. Here's ours. Welcome to episode 3 of What About Water? I'm Jeff Szabo, Chief Executive Officer of the Suffolk County Water Authority, which provides drinking water to 1.2 million residents of Suffolk County, New York. In the first 2 episodes of the podcast, we told you about our history, our unique water source, and the role we played in our water testing laboratory in ensuring your drinking water always meets regulations. This episode tells a very different story, a story of a group of people responding to a crisis like none other, one that tested every single aspect of our operation. The nature of our work is one in which we're expected to be prepared for any challenge that comes along, to make sure that water is delivered no matter what. We've done so during snowstorms and blizzards, devastating storms like Superstorm Sandy, even an earthquake a few years back. But a plague? That's not in the playbook. Emergency Manager Rich Bova on how it all got started.
Our office began receiving information related to a potential COVID-19 pandemic in early January. We kept in constant contact with our federal intelligence partners, and by mid-February, it was clear that the situation was worsening into a global event.
And for a utility our size, with a critical mission to fulfill, that meant we needed to move quickly to secure vital supplies, such as personal protective equipment for our employees, so they could continue to make sure a high-quality drinking water supply was available for all of our customers. Emergency Manager Phil Thompson elaborates.
It was a scramble, to put it politely. As the reality of the pandemic set in, there was a nationwide run on all kinds of critical equipment and supplies. Obtaining sufficient personal protective equipment for SCWA employees became a massive challenge. Everyone was fighting for the same supplies. We were driving all over the place, dealing with both traditional and non-traditional retailers and suppliers, and coordinating through the Suffolk County Emergency Operations Center.
Phil, it sounds a bit cutthroat.
That's not too far off. It was kind of every utility for itself for a while.
But such challenges bred creativity in our workforce. One of their great early supply challenges concerned the availability of disinfectant, suddenly a hot product with a sudden urgent need to wipe down surfaces constantly in all our workplaces and vehicles to keep employees safe. In short, there was very little available, and no guarantee we'd be able to replenish the supplies of disinfectant when needed. So what did we do? A couple of SCWA employees came up with an answer: make our own. Fortunately, we're in a position where we have vast supplies of chlorine on hand, trace amounts which are added to the water supply to prevent the growth of bacteria. And so our emergency managers, Rich Bova and Phil Thompson, did a little math and figured out how to use chlorine from our pump stations to create SCWA's own spray bottle disinfectant. Thompson, who is also a top manager in the production control department, explains.
We realized that a perfectly suitable disinfectant product could be made out of 44 ounces of 15% chlorine diluted in 55 gallons of water. We went ahead and mixed it up, bottled it in whatever spray bottles we could find. They were in short supply also, so we're using spray bottles of all shapes and sizes. And with the help of employees from various departments, distributed the product to all offices.
The product even had a name, Bombsums, named after our emergency managers Rich Bova and Phil Thompson, along with a slogan that suited the times, stopping the spread from Huntington to Montauk.
It was just a great example of employees working together to solve a problem. That disinfectant helped us get by safely until other disinfectant supplies could be secured.
So, Phil, what are some of your key takeaways now that we're 15, 16 months into this global pandemic?
Yeah, the communication was outstanding. The communication from the top down, there wasn't anyone in the authority that was left in the dark as to our stance as far as how we were going to respond to this pandemic. Questions were answered in a very timely manner. There was a forum offered to employees to ask questions, and then they were then answered by the administration so that everybody was on top of what was going on. One of the most important things is to have a plan. Making sure that we have a plan to communicate with all of our employees, obtaining PPE and disinfection products, making sure that we coordinate with state and local officials to stay on top of the latest guidance, because that guidance changed several times throughout the course of the last 13 months. SCWA has always treated pandemic planning seriously. We had a pandemic tabletop 3 or 4 years ago that dealt with issues that might arise during a pandemic as far as employee staffing and continuity of operations.
This spirit was all over the organization. I'll tell you quite honestly that in the nearly 11 years I've been CEO of SCWA, I've never seen anything like it. Everyone was locked in to getting their jobs done, and in a way that kept their fellow employees and the public safe. Throughout the pandemic, during even the most brutal parts, the virus was not contracted or spread in SCWA workplaces. And that is true right up to the recording of this podcast. Of course, getting to that point took massive workplace modifications. Vacant office spaces, unused for years, were renovated to spread employees out as much as possible. Plexiglass barriers were constructed between existing workstations. Hand sanitizer dispensers were installed in all offices, and restroom doors were equipped with vacant, occupied signs. But making these physical adjustments was the easy part. Trickier was getting employees to buy in to the need for suddenly restrictive policies designed to keep them safe, policies that necessarily limited the basic human instinct to socialize, to clap each other on the back, and to be in close contact. All of that had to change. Chris Given, our Deputy Director of Construction Maintenance, was one of the employees who had to enforce such policies on a daily basis.
It took some major arm twisting, no doubt about it. These guys are used to shaping up in the morning, speaking about their job, getting the materials ready, and planning their day. And now suddenly, we're telling them that they can't congregate in the morning. They need to maintain social distance. They need to wear masks. They need to get their temperature taken, fill out a questionnaire about how they're feeling and if they have any symptoms. These are a lot of changes that needed to happen, and it goes out of the everyday routine of what we're doing or what they're used to doing.
Construction maintenance utility worker Dominic Palladino elaborates.
Honestly, it impacted us in every single aspect of the job. Physically, you're out there all day. The weather's hot. You're down in the hole. I mean, it's hard enough. Adjusting to that workload with a mask on the whole time, that's a whole different thing. Mentally, too, that was a major adjustment. You're used to being in close contact, constant verbal communication with everyone around you. COVID changed all that. And suddenly you're at a distance. It's tough to hear what everyone's saying through the masks. You had to improvise. We all had to adapt to totally different circumstances very quickly.
But you did, and we all owe you a huge thank you for that.
You're welcome.
It's time for a water break with Seth Wallach.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm at South Shore University Hospital today, formerly Southside Hospital, if that sounds more familiar to you. I'm here to talk to Kurt Jarsdorfer and Anthony Pelliconi. Kurt is the Director of Facilities Management here, and Anthony is the Associate Executive Director of Operations. At the height of the pandemic in Suffolk County, this hospital was nearing its breaking point with new COVID patients. And so they decided to build what they called a surge hospital in the parking lot to house and treat overflow patients. But the surge hospital, like any hospital, needed a reliable supply of clean running water. That's where we came in. So it's the height of the pandemic, whenever that was, last March or last February. When was that decision made that, okay, we need this extra space, we need this extra facility? And who makes that decision?
So a couple of different things. One, first I have to thank not only the health system, Northwell Health, but my strongest partner, not only on the emotional side, but on the brainstorming side, is the man to the right of me, Kurt Jarsdorfer, the director of facility operations here. So how this all came about, and you say about going back, to those days. On an emotional side, I could tell you those are the days that I could tell you that Kurt and I probably don't want to go back to. It was horrible, worse than people could ever imagine. Whatever you saw on TV or you heard, I would probably say 100 times worse.
Agreed.
Seth, I'll tell you, there was not one place in this building that people were not. Boardrooms. We have 36 ICU beds on record here. At the peak, we had 117 ICU patients. 127 ICU patients. 117 of them were on ventilators. So the foresight of our leadership, thanks to Michael Dowling and his executive team, led to us brainstorming saying, hey, we need to put up a structure quickly. Anthony, Kurt, representing Southside, South Shore University, where do you think it could fit? And right now, our partner, New York Kent, is willing to help us out with a 10,000 square foot mobile complex. And where can that fit? So Kurt and I, for hours, brainstormed as to where can it not only fit on its footprint, but where can we get the IT, the water, electric, and accessibility. And there was only one location. And that was on the south side facing portion of the emergency department right off Main Street. And ironically enough, right there was a Suffolk County Water Authority fire hydrant that's placed on our campus. So with that, we made the decision together, as well as the rest of the executive team here, Donna Moravec and Lenny Nordowitz, and in teaming up with the clinical team, how do we get what we want? And we were willing to make any accommodations, as well as understand what our limitations were. But water, electric, IT, any major utility was a non-negotiable. So we identified this fire hydrant, and we reached out.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that there was a water authority fire hydrant that was actually right there, which was pretty convenient because it's an easy hookup to water if you just plug into the fire hydrant. Do you remember what that process is like? Is it just a matter of attaching some sort of hose to the hydrant? Or
Correct. We made a phone call, and the water authority came right out, and they put a connection on there for us that we can hook a hose up. And the initial setup for that was to feed all of we had portable trailers brought in as well for bathrooms. One for the patients and one for the staff. And we were able to fill the tanks. They had large water storage tanks that we were able to fill. This way they had the ability for warm water, hand washing, toilets, and everything needed like that.
People, society in general, may not totally appreciate and value what a utility can bring for them and the ease that it has to their lifestyle. So for water specifically, hand washing, not only because of the pandemic, but naturally, is the most important thing that we can be doing during this pandemic, is washing your hands. And potable water is the foundation of that necessity. By the grace of God, in which we had this fire hydrant, what is it, 20 feet, 30 feet, maybe outside this tent?
Perfectly located.
It was a godsend that it was there, and that was the exact footprint in which we identified that could fit this to meet the demands and the needs of the communities in which we serve. By partnering with Suffolk County Water, and we said, listen, we have a fire hydrant, we need water, and the team came down, they says, just tell us what you need, and we'll figure out that part. And they put Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that actually, additionally to that, thinking about the rest of the infrastructure, heating, cooling, and so on, that water capability for the portable chillers that we brought in to keep this place cool and comfortable, we needed that constant source for that as well. So having it right there just made everything so easy.
We're hoping that everything that we have done, all the opportunities that we still see are out there, and the successes that took place and the creativity in 2020, we're sharing not only with the podcast, but we're sharing with everyone, because it's always lessons learned. And how do we make it better for day-to-day use? And God forbid if something like this happens again, it should never be buried with Kurt and I. It should be shared, because then it could get out there. And we're hoping podcasts like this, people have an awareness and appreciation of something simple called water.
I want to really thank you both for sitting down with me today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We really appreciate you doing this.
Thanks, Seth. To keep employees as far apart as possible, we also embarked on an ambitious plan to stagger work schedules and to have as many employees as possible work from home and telecommute. Chief Technology Officer Michael Litka explains.
Essentially, key upper management employees already had the ability to remotely work from home. What we needed to do quickly was to develop a plan to handle more than 150 users to be able to work from home, making sure that everyone had the equipment they needed and knew how to use it. We also made sure the phone system could redirect the main call center number and employees' phone extensions to their home or mobile phones. Overall, it went amazingly well. Having employees from all departments working productively from home as if they were in the office was quite an achievement, and I thank the entire IT department for their outstanding support.
As noted earlier, due to our safety protocols, COVID did not spread in the workplace. But everyone goes home at night, and most come into contact with family members who've been in other places, and when they get back together at night, spread of the virus was inevitable. Rigorous protocols to send sick employees home and quarantine other employees who were found to be in close contact with them were put in place. At the peak of the pandemic in New York, during the spring of 2020, this safety measure led, at times, to massive employee absences, putting to the extreme test our ability to maintain continuity of operations. And over the course of the year, we had 200 employees in just our construction, maintenance, and production control departments quarantined, and many more than once. Deputy CEO for Administration, Donna Mancuso, elaborates.
We made sure our employees always had the most up-to-date health guidelines from the CDC, New York State, and Suffolk County health departments. But you can't control what people do outside of work. On one occasion, an employee unfortunately had a death in the family, and several of his coworkers attended the funeral. The funeral turned out to be a super spreader event due to one person who tested positive a day later. And though none of our employees developed COVID, the guidelines from the health department in place at the time meant that they all needed to be quarantined for 14 days. There was another situation in which an employee had been at work and suddenly started to feel sick with symptoms of COVID. So we sent him home to seek testing. As per the guidelines in place, we had to trace his close contacts at work back 48 hours. That led to 4 additional employees on his crew being quarantined. That totaled almost half the employees at that one location. The departments had to make adjustments to move crews around in order to cover the work.
And Donna, keeping on top of all of that had to be extraordinarily difficult.
Yes, it was. Our human resources staff responded to employees 7 days a week, from early in the morning to late at night when issues of potential sickness arose. There were so many considerations. Does this person potentially have COVID or just a common cold? Who had they been in contact with that would require a lengthy quarantine? We had to work through every situation individually and respond in a way that would keep everyone safe. HR staff set up a spreadsheet to track the situation of every impacted employee, specifically who was in mandatory isolation due to a positive test or in precautionary quarantine due to exposure to a positive case, and the date that they would be able to return to work. We kept in contact with them throughout their quarantine period and coordinated their return, keeping their managers apprised of the situation.
Thank you, Donna. How did the Water Authority address employees who had daycare needs or children home from school?
Right. So during this same period of time, schools and daycare providers shut down, which caused additional hardships for our employees. So we made arrangements and accommodations for remote work and shift changes as required by federal regulation at the time. Another spreadsheet was created and maintained to keep track of these requests. Some of the shift changes are still in place as not all schools and daycare centers have reopened.
The brunt of this effort fell on Emily Lowe and Alex Nuzzo. Here's Emily.
We constantly research state and federal guidelines. At any time we were unaware of how to proceed, we reached out to the experts and followed their guidance. But there was a point where we had to make judgment calls based on each unique situation. Each case seemed to be completely different from the others.
Alex, what did you find most challenging?
Trying to talk with someone and have them take you through everything they did for the past 48 hours to identify potential contacts was tough. There were so many cases that could have gone either way, quarantine or not. We played on the safe side to ensure that none of our employees were at risk. There were days where the entire day was consumed by speaking with employees and supervisors about quarantines and COVID.
Some cases, of course, were clear-cut. Like workplaces all around the country and all around the world, SCWA had its share of employees who were severely stricken by the virus. One of them was senior clerk in the engineering department, Teresa Frank.
One day I started to feel pretty bad. I had a fever coming on. I have asthma, so I was concerned, and then soon after, I could hardly breathe. I realized I needed to go to the hospital, and I did. I was in the hospital for a week. I was exhausted, and I felt like I was fighting for my life. It's scary because you're in isolation. I was discharged and went home. I went home with oxygen and still couldn't breathe.
Is there any common experience the rest of us have been through you can relate it to?
Well, I don't know if it's a common experience, but you feel like a zombie because you're exhausted and you can't smell and you can't taste anything.
Well, Teresa, I'll have to take your word on the zombie experience. But how did you come out of it?
On day 35, out of nowhere, I felt better.
Just like that?
Just like that.
Other employees may not have felt the full devastating effects of the virus on their own personal health, but felt COVID's devastating impact on the lives of loved ones, such as Production Control Superintendent of Operations Chris Zimmer. COVID cost Chris's mother her life.
Yeah, Jeff, she had a number of underlying conditions. We told her at the time it was probably not a good idea to go to the hospital due to the COVID threat, but she needed medical care for underlying conditions. So she did go, and she must have contracted it there. She died shortly after, and then we all came down with the virus ourselves, me, my wife, kids, and brother. For me, it wasn't so bad. I felt a little run down, a bit of a fever, but I got past it.
What happened next, Chris?
I felt like I became patient zero at the office. I think I was the first one at SCWA to get it.
Well, not quite, but close. Alex?
He was one of the first, but not the first.
I told you HR was on top of this stuff. Chris, what happened after that?
Next felt like the month from hell. I had obvious symptoms, but I couldn't get a test. At the time, it was nearly impossible. They were mostly going to people with serious comorbidities. Before I had known there was anything wrong with me, I had been in contact with a bunch of people from the office. And as a result, a whole bunch of guys, including myself, had to be quarantined for 14 days to make sure everyone was safe. As I was coming out of quarantine, my wife was going into quarantine, and she had it way worse than I did. Bad fever, cough, and other symptoms.
A once-in-a-lifetime experience?
Let's hope so, Jeff.
One of the many tragic aspects of the pandemic is its devastating impact on the economy. So many people, through no fault of their own, found themselves out of work and unable to pay their bills. As a result, SCWA, in accordance with state law, stopped shutting off water service for lack of payment. But we went well beyond that, working closely with customers to understand their needs and to set up payment plans that would help them get through these tough times. Keith Potter works in our customer service call center.
I wish I remembered the man's name. He was from Brentwood, and I remember that. And he called to ask if his bill was due. He was worried that he had missed it. As I was looking up the account, he told me that 2 of his family members were actually sick with COVID in Southside Hospital at that time. And I can clearly hear the worry in his voice. I believe his account was past due a few weeks, but I assured him immediately that his water would not be turned off, and we would work with him with any late fees that may accrue on that bill. The call went silent for what felt like a minute. I feared the call had dropped. I was just about to ask him if he was still there when he simply just said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you" a few times. He couldn't say much else. I got the feeling it was the first piece of positive news he heard that week, and he really needed some positive news.
Thanks, Keith. Finding ways to help and interact with our customers while the old rules were being scrapped in favor of on-the-fly adaptations to society's new norms was tricky, not just in the call center, but in the field as well. Bob Marcos, a customer service technician for decades, was at the front line in adjusting to the new protocols designed to keep both SCWA customers and its employees safe by limiting home visits to just emergency situations. Bob, give us a sense of how home visits have been handled during the pandemic.
Well, when you first arrive at a home, you want to address the situation. I knock on the door, the customer comes, I will stand outside, and I will more or less talk to the customer for a few minutes, see what the problem is, and then I'll address the pandemic situation. To make it safe, I'll tell the customer, listen, I want to know, I don't want to be disrespectful, but is anybody in the house had the COVID or has been exposed to the COVID or has a fever or a bad cough, within the last, 10 to 15 days? And at that point, the customer will address it. And they will tell me that, no, everybody here is fine and healthy. Or they'll say that somebody had it maybe a few weeks ago, but they're cleared for business now. But at that point, I will tell the customer, okay, it sounds good. What we're going to do, I'll tell the customers, I'm going to come into the home. But what we're going to have to do is I'm going to go suit up. I want to put on some personal protection, equipment. I'm going to wear a mask. I'm going to put on a face shield. And I'll also tell the customer if they could please put a mask on. And at that point, I'll suit up. I go into the house. We go right down to the job. I'll make the repair. And then at that point, I come right out again. And I'll discuss the situation with the customer as I'm out in the front lawn. I want to get out of the house as soon as possible. And most people are very good about it. They're very receptive to it because obviously they want to remain healthy as well. So we're trying to protect each other.
No one needed anything else to worry about during this terrible ordeal. One thing our customers never had to worry about throughout the pandemic, though, is the quality of their drinking water. Caitlin L. is the laboratory's senior bacteriologist.
Exactly, Jeff. Very early on, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the World Health Organization made it clear that COVID-19 is transmitted through person-to-person contact and not through water. Airborne viruses are not a threat to groundwater. Even if COVID-19 happened to be a waterborne virus, SCWA adds a trace amount of chlorine to the water supply to prevent the growth of pathogens. It's really our mission to keep drinking water safe for our customers, no matter what's going on.
All the upheaval, the sense of dislocation, the fear of getting sick, seeing a friend get sick, or a loved one get sick or even die. Anyone listening knows how rattling that has been to our well-being. SCWA employees dealt with this in different ways, but often with humor. Again, Keith Potter.
When efforts were made to spread out employees, some worked from home, some went to a formerly vacant, now newly renovated building near our Quorum call center, and some of us are transferred, like myself, to a vacant space at our facilities in Hauppauge. It was tough at first. You're worried about your health, your family's health. On our lunch hours, we're listening to Governor Cuomo's pandemic updates. Everybody was doing their best, but it was tense. So one day I decided to break the tension with starting a little trivia contest. First it started with Long Island trivia, what's the oldest mansion, stuff like that. And now it's morphed into 80s and 90s music trivia. Little something to break the tension, and it started to work. We started seeing smiles return to faces.
This pandemic seems to be winding down. we can all at least visualize resuming normal life, but it unquestionably has a lasting impact on SCWA, how we conduct our operations, as it has on so many other aspects of our lives. Virtual meetings? Now it's hard to imagine a time when we didn't have them, and they will surely continue into the future. Likewise, being forced by necessity into measures such as staggered work schedules has us now evaluating the potential benefits of such work arrangements. There are many, many ways we are evaluating how to improve our operations, and most importantly, our service to our customers. Jane Devine is a longtime SCWA board member and former elected and appointed public official in Suffolk County. Jane has held many leadership positions focused on consumer protection. What are your thoughts about COVID and how the Water Authority handled providing safe drinking water?
I think that part of the success that we showed was that we were acting early. I know that some of our personnel who are involved in preparing for such crises were already tracking the virus before it even came to the United States. By the end of February, we were ready. We were ready for a very serious situation that was going to affect our staff. And our purpose, of course, was to protect the staff, which indeed then protected the water that it goes to our customers. We had to go out and get PPE. We had to educate the staff on what was coming and how they could protect themselves. We had to get them used to wearing masks at work, which is not an easy thing. And also, a good number of the staff then began to work from home as a precaution. And not only they, but the supervisors had to get used to this brand new kind of working for the Water Authority. I'm reminded of Gail Sheehy, who was a writer in the 1970s, who wrote a very famous book that was very famous then anyway, called Passages. And it talked about the passages in most persons' lives. Well, there's passages in the Water Authority as well. And the passage that we went through with COVID is a very dramatic one, but I think that we were able to handle it with not only preparation, but with precision. And we have to continue not only as individuals, but as an authority, as a utility, to do the things that we need to do to protect everyone. So that means that as a utility, we need to do the masks. We need to practice whatever social distancing is projected to be appropriate now. We need to make sure the vaccine is available to our employees as they become eligible for it. And we need to really continue to follow these variants, which I think are a tremendous threat. So I think we need to listen to our staff who are listening to the scientists, and we need to follow the directions that we're given. And I know that we will, because we know that compliance is going to help us deliver our product.
That will wrap this episode and a topic that is hopefully on its way out of our lives for good. Please join us for our 4th episode of What About Water next month, when we'll cover the conservation of our vital groundwater resource, the source of 100% of our drinking water. What About Water is produced by Jeff Szabo, Tim Moats, and Seth Wallach. This episode was developed by Tim Moats and engineered and edited by Seth Wallach. If you enjoyed What About Water, be sure to rate us and leave a review. Help spread the word by telling a friend and by following the Suffolk County Water Authority on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, I'm Jeff Szabo.
I'm more into the Long Island Water podcast. Oh, yeah, Suffolk County Water podcast, yes. I'd love to be a guest on that one.